talk to anyone, everyone, so serve to change lives, 'cause lives can be changed forever. Serve to change lives whenever we're working together. Talk to someone right now. Start now and wow. When the right time arrives, you'll see you've changed lives. So serve to change lives.
Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. My name is Richard Dent. I'm your MC for today's meeting of Rotary Melbourne. I was born on Gurnai land, and I acknowledge that many of us here are on the land of the Wurundjeri or the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians present here today. Note that most microphones have been muted for the duration of the presentation. Accolades, comments and questions can be posted into the Zoom chat function throughout the presentation. Personally, I'm looking forward to our guest speaker, John Thwaites, today. My first brief conversation with him was in 1998, embarrassingly on my second day at the Victorian Council of Social Service. John rang and asked to speak to the CEO, and I happened to answer the phone, and I said, "Is she expecting your call?" And he responded, after a gentle pause, "No, but I am the Deputy Leader of the Opposition." I'm still embarrassed by that 23 years later. John's been a great supporter of Leadership Victoria in my time there, and now Rotary, and a particular shout out to him for his support in helping us acquire $30,000 US for Iranian-born Monash student Sam Loney to attend Oxford as part of the Rotary Peace Fellowships. Thank you, John, specifically for that. Wonderful. Thanks formally today will be given by Ross Scholes-Robertson, followed by the Loyal Toast presented by President Reg. Please make sure that your glass is charged. Ross.
Thank you, Richard. Well, here we all are stuck at home because of the COVID-19 virus. Are we well off? Well, when you compare us with disasters of the past, including the Spanish flu and World Wars I and II, we're not doing too badly at all and have done well in comparison with the rest of the world in controlling the virus. Also, we need to give thanks for all the facilities we have these days, like television, computers, that let us, despite our current lockdown, communicate anywhere in the world, plus phones that let us see the people that we're speaking to. At least in my case, I can see my local grandchildren on the phone from time to time, and especially my son and family up in New South Wales. And of course, thanks to our technical Rotarians, we're still able to have our Rotary Zoom meetings and to participate in them. We all need to think about the benefits which this modern age creates for us and do everything possible, including solving climate change problems and getting COVID vaccinations up to target so that things get back to normal quickly. Then those businesses suffering in the current lockdown may again prosper. As always, we give thanks for being able to get together in the way we do, but being more hopeful now that we will get back to normal and meet face to face before the end of the year.
Well, thank you, Ross. And it's now my duty to propose a toast. Rotarians and guests, a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia, Rotary International.
Rotary International.
Members, visitors and guests, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 11th meeting of this Rotary year and our 4,907th club meeting in our 101st year. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We've got quite a large number of visitors and delighted to have you here with us. Our guest speaker today is Professor John Thwaites AM, Chairman of ClimateWorks Australia, and quite a few other things that we'll talk about a little later, speaking on Australia's progress against the UN sustainability goals. John will be more fully introduced later in the program by Chair of the Day, Gary Fowler, Chair of the Rotary Melbourne Environment Sustainability Committee. Also here online today, we have Claire Moore. Claire is our inaugural winner of the club's Environmental Sustainability Award, and we'll be hearing a little from Claire shortly. In the meantime, would you please join me in making everybody welcome? And it's now my pleasure to call on Peter Berg, who's Vice Chair of our club's Environmental Sustainability Committee, to make the presentation of the Environmental Sustainability Award. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, President Reg, and welcome everyone. Environmental sustainability has been identified as the 7th area of focus of Rotary International, which is supporting the environment. Rotary Melbourne considers it important to be seen as a sustainable club and implement best practice environmental practices in all that we do. This involves communicating our environmental sustainability initiatives and achievements at every opportunity, and to play an important role within the Rotary network and in the wider community in promoting the 7th area of focus. As part of its commitment, Rotary Melbourne, in its centenary year, has established an annual Environmental Sustainability Award to recognise a person who has made an outstanding contribution in supporting the environment. Award nominations were received from Rotary Melbourne members, and a thank you to all club members who submitted a nomination. The Inaugural 2020-2021 award is made by the club on the recommendation of the Environmental Sustainability Committee to a person who has made an outstanding contribution as a leader in an important aspect of environmental sustainability, and through this has made a major contribution towards creating awareness in the community and inspiring others to change behaviours in supporting the environment. The recipient of the Inaugural 2020-2021 Rotary Melbourne Environmental Sustainability Award is Claire Moore, who will be presented with the award by Professor John Thwaites following the reading of the citation, which recognises Claire's significant achievements. Now I'll read the citation. Rotary Melbourne Environmental Sustainability Award 2020-2021 awarded to Claire Moore. The Rotary Club of Melbourne Environmental Sustainability Award recognises the distinguished service of Claire Moore towards Rotary International's 7th area of focus, supporting the environment. Through this award, Rotary Melbourne recognises and applauds Claire Moore's willingness to put service above self with her important research work on bee genetics and the creation of a social enterprise, training young people to be beekeepers. Over the past 14 years, Claire's enthusiasm and passion for the environment has seen her focus on projects that address the global problem of a declining bee population. The pollinating activities of bees are vitally important in preserving and enhancing global food security, along with habitat and biodiversity. Claire is breeding a genetically diverse range of hygienic queen bees on the family farm at Kyneton. Her objective is to create a resilient, diverse, and adaptable strain of bees that have a better chance of negating the parasitic varroa mite, which would have a devastating impact on reducing the bee population should it enter Australia. In 2018, in conjunction with the Department of Justice and Safety, Claire created the Sweet Justice Social Enterprise Program. Sweet Justice is a successful rehabilitation course that educates young male detainees at the Malmesbury and Parkville Youth Justice Centres in the practice of beekeeping. There is a critical shortage of beekeepers in Australia. Sweet Justice not only enhances a healthier environment by creating more beehives, but provides a career path for the young detainees in beekeeping. This has a positive effect on their welfare and well-being. Claire is an innovator at the cutting edge of the bee industry and is exploring further research opportunities in bee genetics in collaboration with tertiary institutions. Claire has collaborated with the Melbourne Polytechnic to offer Victoria's first accredited course in beekeeping. She has received both community and government recognition and was runner-up in the 2019 National AgriFutures Rural Women's Award after winning the Victorian round of the award. In 2020, she was a recipient of the National Mentoring Scholarship from the Department of the Prime Minister's Office and Cabinet for Women, and is a finalist in the National 2021 Boosting Female Founders Initiative. Claire's goal is to combine her skills in bee genetics, education, and social enterprise into a collective focus which is centred on the Sweet Justice program. Now, Claire will be presented with the award on behalf of Rotary Melbourne by Professor John Thwaites. Thank you, Professor Thwaites.
Well, thank you, Peter. And it is a great honour and privilege to be able to present this award to Claire. In introducing the topic, Peter talked about the awardees should have distinguished themselves in an aspect of sustainability, whereas I think what you've done is distinguish yourself across all the key aspects of sustainability: economic, social, and environmental. Obviously, the environmental through the support for bees and the incredible role that they play in biodiversity and food and in our natural systems. But the social and the economic through training, and particularly training of young men who've been through the prison or justice system to help put them into a good long-term job. So you really have been able to do what is the sweet spot of provide economic, social, and environmental benefits. So it's a great honour and privilege to be able to give you this award through the ether. I do wish I was there in person, but nevertheless, I know it'll be a great recognition for what you've done. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Professor Thwaites. Very kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Thwaites, John. And Claire, this is something I don't do a lot of, but it's always a delight to virtually pass over a cash prize. And
the first for me as well.
I won't even have to say the check's in the mail, because I think it will get to you by electronic transfer. But congratulations. It was a keenly sought after award, and it's an absolute thrill to be making this presentation to you. I'm now going to give you a few minutes to say a few words to us, Claire.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute honour and a delight to be with you today. The awards process, I've met some really lovely Rotarians, and I'm just so excited to be here. I've been excited all morning, I must admit. But my love for bees started when I was 4 years old, and my love for the environment and sustainability, I think, came from growing up in Belbrae on the Great Ocean Road, and I was always really passionate about the environment. But when I moved to Kyneton, to our family farm in 2014, my love for farming and for the environment and for sustainability grew even more. So in 2019, I applied for the AgriFutures Rural Women's Award. And to be honest, I didn't think I had any hope at all. It was just more a pipe dream at that stage to be able to pitch to the Victorian state government and the federal government to be able to do something with the beekeeping industry and to be able to make a difference. So the premise behind the awards is if you pick a project or an idea that you would like to work on within industry and within the environment, and you work on that for the next 18 months to 2 years. So my initial idea was to work on bee genetics for the varroa mite. Australia is the only country in the world that doesn't have, or honey producing country in the world that doesn't have the varroa mite, which is a parasitic mite that feeds on, it attaches itself to bees and it feeds on their fat stores, creating mass mortality in every country that's arrived in. And it was pretty difficult to explain the varroa mite and the beekeeping industry's fears pre-COVID. But now we have, now COVID is here, and it's a lot more real that we could have something that could actually decimate our beekeeping industry and our bees, and therefore our food security is a bit more real. So I started working on bee genetics back in 2019. I attended Tocal College with the funding from the bursary of the Rural Women's Award. and learnt bee genetics, queen breeding, and I'm in line to do artificial insemination of queen bees once I can make it to New South Wales again safely to be able to do the training. But I didn't realise when I applied for the Real Women's Award just what a big thing it was and how much it would snowball. So I was on ABC radio with John Fane, and we were talking about the Real Women's Award and bees because he's actually a beekeeper and a really keen apiarist. And he asked me, had I ever considered teaching beekeeping, or did I know about beekeeping within the justice system in America? And I must admit, I said to John, no, I don't know anything about it. And he said, you should look into it. And I think he picked me pretty well. But and I was like, John, I've never considered it, not in a million years. But by the time I left the ABC radio station, my phone was going off and everyone who knew me was saying, Claire, that fits you perfectly. You should give it a try. So I called up Malmesbury Youth Justice, which is just 2 kilometres from my house. And at that stage, there had been an outbreak of COVID and all the teaching staff had been taken out overnight, and the boys they were actually rioting. They were on the roof. And I said, could I bring my bees? Expecting them to say no. But it was a very strong yes. So I took my bees in and we've been working in there for the last 12 months. Sweet Justice is now extending out to Parkville, Beechworth, and we're looking at further correctional facilities within Australia. We've had interest from nearly every state. And we're also working on setting up a social enterprise in Bendigo, because I've noticed that the most difficult thing for young people leaving the justice system is having supported and guaranteed employment when they leave. So that's what we're going to be working on the later part of 2021. So it's been a really incredible journey, one that I'm really blessed to have been on, and I've met some beautiful and amazing people, and a lot of them have been from Rotary. I've volunteered with Rotary for Bees. That's a great organisation, and have had really great time with everything to do with Rotary for Bees. They put on some wonderful events and fundraisers. But it just feels like just the start. I'm 2 years in, but it just feels like the start of what I'm going to be working on environment and sustainability from now on. But it's an absolute pleasure to be here and an honour to have the award. So thank you very much.
Bravo to you, Claire. And what a story. Isn't it amazing how sometimes a series of events like that can change your life? And you're now changing the lives of many others through your service. Well done. And thank you, John Thwaites, for assisting with the presentation. Really great to have you here. I'm now going to call on Jim Orchard, who is going to tell us a little bit about who's from the organising committee to launch the silent auction for the Smith Family Learning for Life program. And I can say some opportunities are coming up, folks, so you've got to be in it to win it. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, President Reg. As many of you already know, the Around the Bay event for 2021 has been cancelled. Bicycle Network were looking at rescheduling the ride for late January next year, but this hasn't been possible. So no Around the Bay until October 2022 at the earliest. While this is bad luck for Melbourne bike riders, it is a big blow for the Smith Family's Learning for Life program, and we heard about that a couple of weeks ago. To help us maintain our long-standing support for the Smith family, we are today launching the 2021, or this year's, Around the Bay silent auction. Details are on the homepage of the website and in front of you there on the screen. Description of all the items being auctioned and the email address to send in your bids. Let me thank everybody who donated prizes, but especially a big thank you to Alan Trumbull. Alan, as you know, was the winner of the bike raffle a few weeks ago, and he has very kindly donated his $2,000 bike voucher back to the silent auction, a great example of the Rotary spirit. So please have a look at the items on offer, and if you can see anything interesting, perhaps an early Christmas present, then make a bid. Status of bids will be provided on the website, updated daily right through to the end of the auction, which will be on Tuesday, 28th of September. Thank you all for supporting this worthy cause.
Thank you, Jim. And just a few more notices before we get to the important business of this meeting is to hear from Professor Thwaites. First of all, the club's nominating committee. I'm pleased to announce the club's president's nominations committee has met and has put forward Bev Brock for the position of president-elect in 2022-23. And Bev has accepted that nomination most gratefully. All members at this stage are now able to nominate a candidate for this office under our rules, and all nominations must be in writing, signed by the nominee and their nominator and proposer, and be lodged with the Honorary Secretary at Russell Board by no later than 2:10 p.m. on Wednesday, the 29th of September. If required, a ballot of members present at that meeting will be conducted at the club's lunchtime meeting on 6th of October. The second announcement is just a few words of congratulations to an absolute stalwart member of the club, past president Bob Glindemann, who's served in Rotary for over 38 years. 28 in our club. Bob has a long history of humanitarian service through Rotary, and under his direction, Rotary Melbourne has provided volunteers for more than 17 years to Second Bite and ongoing support to the donations in kind facility down at West Footscray. His efforts for the community were recognised with a Medal of the Order of Australia, OAM, in 2011. Bob served as club president in 2003 to 2004 and struck up the Axel Award, which recognises the efforts of club members annually. Have a great anniversary of your 38th year, Bob. Thank you. Finally, two more quick ones. Firstly, the District 9800 is collaborating with Mentor Match to respond to the Victorian State Government's challenge to strengthen social and community connections for international students studying and living in Victoria. Mentees will typically be students in their mid-20s who are toward the end of their respective studies. We have an opportunity to get involved, to find out more and perhaps become a mentor if you're so inclined. Have a look at the bulletin next week or check out their website at www.rotarymentors.org.au. Finally, just to note that many of us are aware that last Wednesday was Are You OK Day? That is the 8th of September. And while we didn't make a big deal of this celebration on the designated day, I'd like to suggest that we make this simple question, are you okay, a part of our daily routine, especially right now while we endure our 6th lockdown. If you haven't heard from someone or know they might be struggling, why not give them a quick call and ask, are they okay? You'd be amazed sometimes at the huge positive impact this simple question can have. It's now my pleasure to hand over today's meeting to our chair for the day, Gary Fowler, who will introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, Gary.
Thanks, Reg. And we're just extremely fortunate today to have John Thwaites talking to us on this terribly important and topical subject about Australia's progress on the towards achievement of the National Sustainable Development Goals. John's well known to you, so I'll keep his introduction very brief. And just to note that John is happy to answer questions. So if you have any questions for John, can you put them in the chat room? Now, following from a very successful political career, culminating with service as the Deputy Premier of Victoria from 1999 to 2007, John joined Monash University as a Professorial Fellow in the role of Chair of the Monash Sustainable Development Institute and ClimateWorks Australia. John's also chair of the National Sustainable Development Council and was previously chair of the Australian Government's National Sustainability Council. He's co-chair of the Leadership Council of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and chair of a number of other organizations within that network. He's also the only Australian appointed to the Lancet COVID-19 Commission. So John today will give us a progress report on Australia's progress against the UN sustainability goals. Please join me in welcoming John. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you. I am being told I can't start screen sharing while another participant is sharing, so I'll ask whoever is doing that to unshare. And it is great to be here today. I'd like to start also by acknowledging I'm on the traditional land of the Boonwurrung people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I really am pleased to be here with Rotary. I must say I'd much prefer to be having lunch with you face to face, and Reg Smith is an old friend and colleague, and it would have been great, but a number of others of you are also. So we'll make the best of it we can. And I'm very pleased that I can share with you some of these insights. And I think that should be showing on the screen now. Is that, you seeing that on the screen? Yep, good. Okay, well, as you indicated, I'm going to talk about Australia's progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. But the first thing I'd like to do is talk about targets. Now, I know very well from my time as a minister just how important targets are in getting governments and communities to act. And to be honest, without them, you just respond to the issue of the day. And targets are very important in helping us shift from that responsive mode to that medium and long-term thinking that we need. But I think they do help us shift from the short-term to the long-term, but they also mobilise action. And they help us crystallise priorities and engage stakeholders. And my experience of that was when I was water minister and we had the Millennium Drought. And I think most of you would remember the Target 155 campaign, where we targeted for everyone to use 155 litres per person of water per day. And that really did help mobilise action and crystallise our priority around water saving. Of course, the other thing that they do is hold governments to account, which is one reason why governments don't particularly like targets. But as a minister, they do certainly focus your attention on the target and on the medium term and drive the bureaucracy towards a result. I think we're all thinking of targets at the moment, and the target we're thinking of is 80% vaccination. And that is mobilising the community. You can see those lines of people out there having a target, knowing that we're going for 80%, I think is very helpful. But this is a short-term target. And I think it is fair to say that Australia is pretty good at a crisis, responding to a crisis like COVID, but we're not so good at medium and longer term challenges. And that's why I'd like to start today by highlighting how important it is for Australia to think about our goals and targets for the mid and longer term. And the Sustainable Development Goals do just that. Now, these goals, there are 17 of them, were agreed by all countries at the United Nations in 2015. And under each of those 17 goals, there are a number of targets to meet by 2030. And all up, there's 169 targets. Someone once described this as a to-do list for a better world. And for example, under the first goal, which is no poverty, there's a specific target for Australia, which is to halve poverty in Australia by 2030. Now, there are social goals like SDG 3, ensuring healthy lives, and SDG 4, quality education, and SDG 5, gender equality. There are economic goals like SDG 8, sustainable economic growth and jobs, and SDG 9, infrastructure and innovation. And there are environmental goals, SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 15, protecting biodiversity. And I think it's really worth thinking about, well, why is it that these goals are so important? And to my mind, it's because the goals cover the big challenges that we face, like health, like the massive urbanisation across the world. By 2050, there's going to be more than 2 billion extra people living in cities than today. But also climate change and environmental degradation. And importantly, jobs and the economy, which is going to be increasingly based on the knowledge economy. And all of this is in an increasingly connected world, which we're seeing today with COVID. We're connected by the same global challenge in all countries, but there are other global challenges like climate change, which also connect us. And the SDGs deal with each of these challenges, but by giving us targets and a framework for thinking broader and longer, they better position us to solve these key challenges. And I think it is worth highlighting, why the SDGs, particularly as opposed to some other framework, are so important. And I think the first reason is that they are the global framework. They're going to be globally influential. They help us think broader and longer. They help us identify business opportunities and risks. They mobilise partnerships, and they'll help us build back better after COVID. Now, the question then is, if we've got this framework, how are we going to achieve them? And I think there are really 3 things we've got to do. First, we've got to look at where we're at now. How are we going now? Second, we have to really think about where we want to be in 2030. What are our targets? And frankly, we haven't done a lot of that in Australia. We haven't had the debate. We tend to get very focused on this week's issue, when should the lockdowns finish, and not really think, where do we want to be in 2030? And what do we need to do to get there? And of course, once we've set those targets, we have to get a strategy for getting there. Now, that's why we established this Transforming Australia 2020 project. And this was something that came out of a role I had for the federal government about 7 years ago as head of the National Sustainability Council, when we did a report on Australia's sustainability progress in 2013, and we updated that in 2018. But we decided with COVID, we should update Australia's performance to 2020. And you can go on that website, you'll see it. And there's a website and dashboard and infographics. And what we specifically did was set quantitative targets for indicators across all 17 of the goals. And then we assessed progress from the year 2000 to date, and then projected out to 2030 to determine whether we were on track or off track to meet those targets. And we also sought to evaluate the impact of COVID on the achievement of our targets. So how do we set those targets? Well, in some cases, we used official Sustainable Development Goal targets, for example, halving poverty by 2030. In other cases, we've used Australian government targets as in the Closing the Gap project for the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous health and education and outcomes. Sometimes we set the target at the top 5 countries in the OECD, because as a very wealthy, successful country, we should aim to be near the top of the OECD in how we respond. And in other cases, we relied on expert advice to really get the best expert advice on where Australia should aim to be by 2030. And we did all of that across 56 indicators involving all 17 goals. And what was the outcome? Well, the summary outcome was that only 12 of the 56 indicators were on track. We're going very well in health and education. Now, by global standards, we're in the top 5 in health, and we're very strong in education. By contrast, we're very, very poor on climate action. And indeed, in another global report on sustainable development goal performance by all countries, which has been produced, called the Sustainable Development Report 2021, produced by the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Australia actually was, I think, second bottom in the world on climate action. And then on the other sustainable development goals, it's a mixed record. And what I want to do now is just delve a little more deeply into that record to see how we're going. So first, the economy and innovation, and starting with poverty, which I referred to before. Now, the blue line and the target you'll see is the Sustainable Development Goal by 2030, down the bottom right, to halve poverty between 2000 and 2030. And that blue line is that you'll see on the screen is the track that we'd need if we're going to be on target. The black line is our actual performance. And what that shows is that actually our poverty level has hardly shifted between the year 2000 and 2019, around 13.2%. And that's pretty disappointing, because during that period, 2000 to 2019, we've seen massive economic growth, but we haven't been able to drive down the level of poverty. It's been pretty consistent throughout that period. A better story, though, is our net national disposable income per capita. And once again, the blue line represents the target we set, which was to increase our national income by 1% a year on a compound growth rate. That was where we assessed it. Others might have other targets that they would set for Australia. But what you'll see is we're actually beating our target for national disposable income growth. Although what you'll notice if you look carefully at that black line, which is our actual performance, we had a very strong performance in that period from 2000 through to 2012, but it's been pretty flat since then. And people are feeling that. Wages haven't increased. If you actually compare Australia in the period 2000 to 2012, we were world beaters. We were one of the best in the OECD, but it's been pretty flat since then. But there are some, I think, real challenges on the horizon, and I'll leave this one with you, and that is, if we're going to succeed in the knowledge economy, which is where the global economy is going, we're going to have to invest in research and development. That's what other countries, China, the US, Europe are doing. Whereas our investment in research and development is actually going backwards. And you'll see since 2008, the investment has declined from about 2.2% of GDP down to 1.8%. Now, compare that to the average of the OECD countries at 2.4%. We're not going to meet our target, and we're well behind most other OECD countries. And another big challenge to the economy is energy productivity. And what you'll see here is that we're not improving nearly as fast as we need to, which is to double energy productivity by the year 2030. Well, just to turn to society and livability and equality. First, to start with some really good news, and our life expectancy in Australia is very high and it's increasing. Once again, we're right at the top of the OECD. We're on track to meet a target of being in the top 5 in the OECD. The one big challenge we've got is Indigenous life expectancy, which you'll see is the red line on the graph at the bottom, which is still some 10 years behind the life expectancy for the whole population. And we do have some health challenges, and one of the biggest is obesity. The proportion of obese persons in Australia is now over 30% and increasing. Now, the best health advice is we should be aiming to get down to around 10% of the population. And yet we're heading in the wrong direction. And that obesity, of course, leads to diabetes and many other chronic conditions. Another good news story is the proportion of our population with tertiary education, and it's really an incredible transition. This is the proportion of the working age population. In 2000, 27% of the population had tertiary education qualifications, or TAFE. Today, it's over 45%. And that is, a huge social change, and it's consistent with being near the top of the OECD. Well, let's turn to another area of diversity, inclusion, and inequality. And this is where we don't rank as well as we might. This is the share of household net worth of the bottom 40%. That is the bottom 2 quintiles of the population, the poorest 40% of the population. How much is their net worth or net assets? And if you look at that as a comparison to the total wealth of the total community, that has declined by 30% since 2004. So if you look at incomes, there hasn't been anything like this drop. The big decline has been in wealth and assets. And, a core part of that is the divide between those who own a home and those who don't. And the share market, the property market have gone through the roof, whereas the bottom 40% aren't sharing in that wealth accumulation. But another area which is a big challenge is the gender pay gap, which is still substantial. And you'll see we've hardly shifted since the year 2000, which is really quite shocking when you think of what we consider are the advances in gender equity. But the gender pay gap today is almost the same as it was in the year 2000. Well, turning to the environment finally, and this is an area that we don't do well in, and I won't go through all the indicators, but obviously one key one is greenhouse gas emissions. And this black line you'll see is our actual emissions, and the blue line is the target. And the target we set based on what's required according to the science to be consistent with a well below 2-degree target. Our target should be halving our emissions from 2000 to 2030. That should be the target. But in fact, you'll see from that black line that our emissions went up and they've come down a little bit but essentially they're much the same now as they were in the year 2000, around 500 million tonnes. And, unfortunately, that's not anywhere near where we need to be if we're going to be on a track for a safe climate and well below 2 degrees. Then the final thing I think I'd like to just highlight is that if we're going to achieve these goals, we're going to need some major transformations in how we do things. Our economy has to involve inclusive growth where we share more equally the economic prosperity, skills, jobs, and wealth. In our health sector, we have to transform from our very good disease care system to one that is better at promoting well-being for all and tackling difficult issues like obesity. We have to transform our energy and industry system to be clean and ensure that our food and land and oceans are providing protection for biodiversity and land. And of course, cities are a key driver of our success and jobs, but also a key driver of climate change and threat to the environment. And finally, I think a key factor in all of this is education and the digital revolution. That the way to achieve so much of this is through education, and that means fair access to the digital economy. And we know we've got uneven access across the world, but even in Australia as well. So thank you for that. And that's a quick snapshot of how we're going. But I think it tells a story. It tells a successful story in some areas of health and education, but a really challenging story in others, climate action, inequality, and some of those social areas. So thanks, Reg.
Well, thank you, John. Very, very insightful. And I'm going to throw it open to questions now. But I thought I might start off with one that's been has been of interest to a number of people recently, which is that within Rotary, which is that there is a view that Rotary should not be involved in the environment area because it's a political issue. I'd be interested in your observations on that perception and what we should do about it.
Well, in my view, every issue is a political issue. There's nothing I've talked about today that isn't political. And why is that? Because politics is all about how the community manages to balance different interests and views and reach a compromise which is the best outcome for the total society. So if you take that attitude, you can't deal with any, pretty much any issue, because you're not going to have universal agreement on gender, on poverty, on the economy, on how the economy should develop. So really, there's not much left. As a former water minister, you often think that, water may not be that political. I can tell you in the middle of the drought, it was intensely political. Every barbecue I went to, there was a debate about what the government should or shouldn't do. So I'd say, in answer to your question, we need to consider that these are challenges we face. By not talking about them, they're not going to go away. Climate change is going to affect all of us, and frankly, it's the speed with which it's already affecting it is growing. We're seeing that with droughts. I'm chair of Melbourne Water. We now have a totally different attitude to where we get our water because we're getting less rainfall and less runoff. So it's already affecting us, and that's going to accelerate. So we better act on it. And I'd be saying Rotary, representing people of goodwill, good intentions, but also of mostly people who've had good opportunities for education and for for earning a good wage or salary or income, these are people who can make a difference. So I'd be saying this is the opportunity for Rotary to make a difference.
Thanks. Jim Orchard, you had a question about R&D. Would you like to ask that?
Sure, thanks, Gary. Just a quick one. You mentioned the R&D and Australia's graph was going in the wrong direction. Is that a government R&D gap, do you think, or is it the private sector, or a bit of both?
Well, it's actually more the private sector than government. And our R&D tends to go into traditional research, and it's not huge, but it does go into the university and that traditional research. Where we're way behind is in business R&D. And, you know, we often compare ourselves to the United States, and in many ways there are a lot of similarities, but the US is miles ahead of us in this area. And you might have noticed recently the Congress, the US Senate and Congress recently passed a massive bill with massive investment in R&D. Now, you know, in part that's probably driven by competition with China, but it's happening, and you know, we're being left behind. And we have some very high quality research that's done in this country at a academic level and a research level, whether it's medical or engineering or other. But where we tend to fall down is then translating that into business outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Could Mary Barry, could I ask you if you would just ask your question about the focus of government in this area?
Oh, great. Thank you, Gary, and thank you very much, John. Just a question around government's approach, because to meet many of these targets that you've outlined today, they require governments to focus on prevention. And we seem to have a terrific response approach to anything, whether it's acute health, whether it's disasters, whether it's violence against women. But when we ask for prevention measures, which are longer term, governments appear to have a terrific no approach to prevention. How are we going to meet any of these targets if we can't get preventative measures in place?
Great question, and good to see you again, Mary. Well, I agree. It is a challenge for Australia. We are very good at responding to emergencies, the bushfires and the crises. And, you know, frankly, we've done better at COVID than most other countries. Haven't been perfect, haven't done as well, arguably, as some, but we've done a good job because we all, I think, pitch in together with a crisis. We've got a very practical approach. But as you say, what we're not so good at is thinking long term, setting targets and collaborating to achieve them. Now, the one area that I'd say Australia does better in this prevention is probably health. So if you look at our what we did, for example, in HIV, or what we do in road accidents, what we do in some of those health areas, we've been pretty good. And I put that down partly to the good role that the medical profession has played and the health professions in being able to, A, build a lot of trust in the community. So there's a high trust for them. And B, to work with government in a collaborative way. But in some of these other areas, like the economy, this challenge of how do we transition to a degree to a more knowledge-based economy and not just rely on digging things out of the ground, important as that is, important part of the economy, don't want to lose it, but we need to broaden out and have a broader, more complex economy. I don't think we have that same collaborative approach to think about it and plan it for the future, set some targets and work towards them. And you compare that to countries that have done very well from sort of opposite sides of the fence in one sense, but two countries would be Germany and China, both of which have a lot of focus on longer term industry planning. You know, China, the 5-year plans, Germany, the industry plans that they work to, and they collaborate across business, government, and society to deliver on those. So I think it's that setting the targets and the collaborative planning and collaborative implementation.
Thanks, John. And just one last question, which I think a number of people are asking in different ways, is that do you think our political system is conducive to us being able to deal with these sorts of challenges and setting targets and achieving them?
Look, it is a challenge in a democracy because if you've got a more authoritarian place like a China, setting targets could arguably be easier. But there are democracies that have been able to do this and set these longer term targets. And if you look at the countries that have done best in reports on implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, they tend to be those Northern European countries, Denmark, Sweden, Germany, that have Finland, that have a culture of setting targets and collaborating around them. And I'd be saying, let's learn from where it's worked well in Australia, like health, and let's transfer that knowledge into other areas where we find it more difficult, like the economy and the environment. But understanding that in a democracy, you can have different views, so it's not going to be easy, but it's worth doing everything we can to develop those longer term targets and work towards achieving them.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, John. It's been most enlightening, and I think it's given us much better insight into what Australia's the need for Australia to actually set targets, and the fact that how badly we're actually performing against those targets, and whilst climate change and so on is sort of fairly well known that we're not very good at it, it's important as to how many of these other areas that we're not achieving. So thank you very much for that very enlightening discussion, and we hope to give that we'll have you back again in the not too distant future to give us a more encouraging report card. We traditionally give our speakers now R100 socks, and I don't think we can do that over the air, but these are limited edition centenary socks, which are 200% Australian made by past President Philip Endersby's Wilderness Wear, and I'm sure that we'll find a way of getting one through to you in the mail. Before I return to Reg to close up, I would just like to mention that that we've got other environmental event plans ahead, and because it's a major focus for our club, and just to foreshadow that we're in an advanced stage of planning for a major event around a lunch around food waste and the environment in June next year. So I hope you'll we'll give you more about that as we progress. So thanks for that. And could I hand back to Reg to close the meeting?
And I'll very quickly jump in there and just say that we've got a partnership with Oz Harvest on food waste and our Transforming Australia project. So that's great.
Thanks, John.
Okay, well, John, I wanted to add my personal thanks for this. This has been an absolutely stunning and excellent presentation today. Thank you enormously for being part of our award presentation as well. And I've got to say, I think our Environmental Sustainability Committee, which has only been going for about a little over a year, is really starting to make a significant contribution both to the environmental and sustainability agenda, but also to our club. And before I close, I'd just like to say a few other big thank yous. Firstly, to our Master of Ceremonies, Richard Dent, and for today's reflection, to Ross Scholes Robinson, our Chairman Gary, and our guest speaker, of course, John, who I've already accoladed, and repeat again too, congratulations to Claire Moore, and thank Peter Berg for his masterful handling of the presentation. Thank you finally to everyone who's been here today. I hope you've enjoyed and valued the content of the meeting. And a reminder to our members, next week is our regular monthly members lunch meeting, again virtually online. Online registration details will be communicated in the bulletin shortly. Hope you can join us. In closing the meeting today, I'd like to play a song that builds on today's message of looking after the planet. It's called Love Song to the Earth. It's performed by Paul McCartney, John Bon Jovi, Sheryl Crow, and many other fine artists. So please enjoy, and in the meantime, please stay safe and spread kindness. Thanks for being here, everyone.